Hey guys, Dozer here bringing you a new Flesh and Blood video. Today, instead of talking about the metagame or even the new set that's coming out, the Hunted, right, I want to talk about the economics behind trading card games, Flesh and Blood, and try to give you an idea about how you should value your cards going into this new set, because there are a lot of bangers in this set that you're not going to want to part with for just any amount of money, and you don't want to get fleeced by overpaying for stuff that's really not worth it. So the first thing I want to talk about is that the reason Flesh and Blood and other card games are so successful in the secondary market, in the sense that you can go out and buy almost any card out there, and most cards are going to be relatively cheap. Most cards are going to be about, 20 cents or so, because commons and stuff are so plentiful that you can easily just source them from people. And you're basically just paying the stamps and the envelopes cost, right? The postage and all that. Well, the reason why these games are so successful is because the company is printing paper and they can sell that paper in packs. And when you buy a $5 pack of cards, you are producing a lot of profit on the side of LSS and the store that you're buying it from, but you're also getting the fun experience of opening effectively a lottery. You might get a really powerful, rare, good, cool card, or you might get a bunch of junk. And so when you do get something of value, that is something that you have invested time and money into. And so you're not going to want to just part with that for nothing. When we talk about economics, we're talking about the trade-offs between things. And so one thing that we should talk about to start out is supply and demand. Now, this is a pretty basic concept in economics. You've probably heard it a million times, but just to give you a brief orientation here, we've got price on the y-axis here and quantity on the x-axis. We can draw a curve that slopes upward and label that supply, and we can draw a curve that slopes downward. We can call this demand. Now, demand represents different prices that people are willing to buy whatever the thing we're talking about is at, right? So you might have very few people willing to buy a thing at a very high price, right? It's very high up here. And you have a lot of people down here who are willing to buy something at a low price. So we'd all buy Command & Conquer for $1, I'm sure. But there are very few people who would buy Command & Conquer for, say, $1,000, a plain old white border CNC. And in the middle, there's the people who would buy it for less and less and less money until it gets to this intersection here. This intersection is the intersection with the supply curve, and we can get into the theory of it in another video if we're interested in that. But the main point here is that people that want to sell Command & Conquers want to make their money back, right? They're not just going to give them away. And what this curve represents here is that there are some people who are willing to sell at a low price, and there are some people who are willing to sell at a high price, effectively. But you might be willing to sell a lot of Command & Conquers at a high price, but you're not going to be able to have people that can actually sell those. And on top of that, you might not be able to get Command & Conquers at sufficient quantities without forking over tremendous amounts of money. And so as you get more Command & Conquers, it costs you more. And so eventually you're going to hit the point where it's not really worth it for you to pay more to get more Command & Conquers, because people are not paying you enough to make it worth your while. So effectively, when you have the point where these two curves intersect, this is what we'd call our equilibrium price. The price would be here, and normally it's called like P star or P prime, and then here would be Q star and Q prime, depending on what you want to call it. But effectively, this is our optimal amount of price that you would pay for it, and the amount of quantity of Command & Conquers that can be supplied at that price. Now, how do you supply Command & Conquers? Well, generally, or whatever card is in question, right? Well, that is related to the price of the booster box that people get the cards from. That's incorporating the quantity of the card that's out there in the world. That's incorporating the price of upcharges at the store level, or whether or not you can buy the cards at bulk as a store yourself. This is why a lot of stores actually make a lot of money by cracking packs. Stores buy boxes for a lot less than we do, right? Because they have to make a profit. And so if a store buys a box for, let's just say it's $60, and they crack up the cards open, you, as someone who would maybe open a Command & Conquer, would need to sell it for a higher price to get the same profit as the store. So it's really hard to compete with stores for selling singles. You have to kind of do it at scale and bulk to really be competitive with that, unless you're really, really lucky. And even then, the prices are going to be impacted by the group of people who are able to supply it for the least cost, because they are the most competitive, right? They're going to be able to make their margin the most, and it's going to force people out of the market who are not able to do that. Now, the interesting wrinkle with this in trading card game worlds is that people don't just open the packs to supply the cards to sell to the market, right? When you go to your armory and you just drop your $10 or whatever to buy 2 packs just to support your store and have some fun, you're not really thinking about selling the cards. And if you open an extra copy of something you don't need, or you open something that you don't want, well, you're not going to put that high of a premium on it. You might try to get around market price for it, or like by trading or selling it to a friend, but you're not really that tied to it. You're not really that invested. You're looking at it as like, oh, I spent $10. I got a card that's worth $40. Yeah, if I sell it for $20, I've made money. My friend's happy. I'm happy. Get it off your hands. You're golden, right? So in that situation, trading card games have an interesting downward pressure on supply because more supply than would be created is getting created, if that makes sense. So when we talk about the new set, Hunted, right? What's interesting about the Hunted is that it is a set where the breakdown of which cards you get in the set are more rare than they used to be, right? And this started around in Outsiders, but basically what happens is you've got about 24 packs in a booster box, right? 24 packs. That breaks down into normally 13 commons per pack. You've got about 2 rares per pack. Sometimes you'll get about 5 Majestics per box, and you might get a third of a legendary per box because, on average, they might be in 1 out of every 3 boxes or so, and so you're going to get a Rainbow Foil legendary about this much. And then, you've got like Fableds and stuff and cold foils and da. And so it gets out of hand pretty quickly. And the reason I bring this up is because, like me personally, I have not spent very much money on my Flesh and Blood collection. And I've got a lot of very good Flesh and Blood cards, a lot of very nice collectible whatever cards, but I've never paid the full price for them. The reason is, or especially the highest they've ever gotten, right? And the reason for that is that I'm, always looking at the Flesh and Blood market and looking at the price trends and making sure I never buy into the hype on something. But at the same time, I also realize that there are cards that are really, really rare that people undervalue. And why do they undervalue them? Well, if you think about it, if it costs you $100 as the new prices of the boxes I think are reflecting, then you are spending $100 on 24 packs, which is going to get you 13 times 24 times 24 about, right? It's going to get 5 Majestics, maybe 1 legendary if you're lucky, and then some other stuff if you're lucky. And so what you're really buying, is about, what is that? Like 300 and something commons. Like you're buying a tremendous number of commons. You're buying 200 whatever something commons. You're buying like 50 rares. You're buying maybe 5 Majestics. And so when you've got this breakdown of you've got about 5 commons for every rare, and then you've got about 5 rares, or maybe 4 rares, we can even say 4 rares per Majestic, and then you've got, maybe 5 Majestics per legendary if you're lucky, right? You start to see that the tiering of the Flesh and Blood rarity system really heavily skews away from a lot of the cards that we actually want to run in our decks. The odds that you're going to get a playset of the commons you want in a box is pretty high. You're probably going to get, and I think I can show you the math in a different video, but I did this a long time ago. But basically, 2 boxes is all you need to do to normally open a playset of every common with a pretty high degree of certainty. Beyond that, you need to do about, I think it was maybe a case, so 4 boxes of rare to get a playset of most of the rares. It does ramp up pretty quickly from there. But then you think about Majestics, and Majestics are normally the money cards, right? These are the cards that are rare. They're not the legendaries that are eating up like hundreds of dollars if they're really, really expensive. But when we've got cards like Command and Conquer, Codex of Frailty, Warmonger's Diplomacy, Weakest Link, the list goes on and on and on, especially now that we've got Shelter from the Storm and a whole bunch of other really powerful Majestics coming out in this set. You have to think to yourself, like, okay, what am I actually paying for when I get a box of cards, and what am I expecting to get? If there are 30 Majestics per set, then what you're really saying to yourself is, hey, I might get a sixth of the cards, assuming they're uniformly distributed, and a $100 box, right? So what you're hoping is that each of those Majestics is worth about $20 on average, because your commons and rares aren't really going to be worth anything. They generally are going to be worth pennies, and so you're basically paying for the chance to get some good Majestics. Now, with those good Majestics, like let's say you did get 5 Majestics that were worth $20 a piece, which has started to happen more recently. Like Rosetta, the market was a lot more favorable. A lot more of the Majestics held their value for longer. But generally speaking, if it's a really weak Majestic or really niche and not really useful in a lot of heroes, then, or really not mandatory or necessary to run, you're really not going to have it command much of a price. And we can talk about that pretty quickly. So why do a lot of these Majestics that we open in these $100 boxes of cards not really carry a price tag, right? Like it's rare. You'd think it'd be worth something, right? Well, if we go back to our supply and demand curve where we've got our quantity, our price, supply, and demand, we're saying that this is the demand for any Majestic. So let's just call this Shelter from the Storm, right? Well, Shelter from the Storm is, and we'll say that's the black lines here, and we'll add another card soon. Shelter from the Storm might have lower supply than most other cards, right? It might have, relative to the print run, you might have 25 times more of a certain common, like a Sink Below, out there, assuming equal print runs of the boxes, as you would the Shelter from the Storms. However, if you have something that's, let's say this red line here is going to be Sink Below, you might have, for instance, a lot more supply of Sink Below. And the demand for Sink Below might be the exact same as for Shelter from the Storm. But what does this do, right? What this does is, and I'll use blue here as a different color. What this does is that even if people care about Sink Below and Shelter from the Storm the exact same, well, if we look back to our equilibrium point of how much quantity are people willing to sell their Shelters from the Storm at, based on how expensive they are to acquire, we can see that the price star here, or we can even do something a bit more clever, price prime, is going to be at one price level, and then the other price, is going to be a lot lower here, and this is P double prime at Q double prime, right? So basically what we're saying here is the price for Shelter from the Storm is going to be higher than the price for Sink Below, even though they are the same competitive demand, like people want them for the same reasons, but one is just less common than the other, right? So obviously, like this is intuitive, like this is not some great revelation. We understand that something that's good, like Sink Below is good, but is harder to get, we say, okay, yes, that is going to be more expensive than Sink Below. That makes sense, right? Well, what happens when we have a situation where the card in question that we're comparing to is less good, but still rare? So let's say we have a situation where we've got our Sink Below. We'll go back to red, right? Sink Below might have this much demand and this much supply, right? So the average price of it is going to be really low. It's going to be around here at P prime here. But if we go over to, say, our blue line here, and our blue line says, well, let's say this is, I don't know, what's a really bad Majestic? So many. Okay, let's just go with Shadow of Blasmafet, right? So for those who don't know what Shadow of Blasmafet does, it is a attack action from Monarch, which is only able to be run by Shadow Brute heroes, which is currently only Levia. And that card is a Majestic, so its supply is less than Sink Below, right? It's Majestic. It's not a common, so it's going to be more rare, less supply. So we shift that curve to the left over here. It's closer to the origin, so it's lower. And there's less quantity of them. And then for the demand, well, how many people own a playset of Shadow Blasmafet? How many people buy multiple playsets of Shadow Blasmafet? How many people run Shadow Blasmafet in every deck? Not many people. And so the demand is also going to shift to the left. And it might shift to the left so much that it is a lower price threshold than Sink Below, even though it is rarer, it is more rare, right? That is the fundamental thing that has happened in the Flesh and Blood marketplace. A lot of these Majestics that are really rare are simply not good enough. They're simply not powerful enough to warrant the price that they have, even competing with commons, right, that are drastically more demanded, but even when their supply is so much higher. And that's even kind of reflected. I'm not going to pull up the TCG player right now, but I encourage you to open a TCG player and check the market price of Sink Below, and then check the market price of Shadow of Plasmafett. And what you'll see is that the Shadow of Plasmafett is probably under $1, and the Sink Below is probably over $1. And that's going to be pretty close to this situation here, right? Where Sink Below is slightly more expensive in relative terms, except for the fact, notwithstanding the fact that it is way more common, but it is way more demanded. So this is, again, obviously just basic economics. No one is shocked to hear that, hey, this thing is wanted by so few people that even though it's rare, no one really wants it, so the price is not going to be that high. Because there is just more quantity of Shadow Plasmafett than people want, and there's less quantity of Sink Below than people want, right? And that's why there's that difference in price. But what we can really start to think about is, how do we start to understand how demanded a card should be and how to contextualize that with its demand and its supply, right? So like if I have a card, let's go back to our example of Shelter from the Storm, right? It's going to have some demand, it's going to have some supply, and the supply in this case is probably going to be very low, right? It's going to be very low, it's going to be very over to the left, and our price, therefore, is going to be very high over here. Well, Shelter from the Storm is generic. It is powerful because it has 4 block. It's got an effect that stops ping damage, so it's useful on tall and wide and medium defense. It's a really overall all-around good card, and it's also rare. So it's generic, it's powerful, and it's rare. So it's rare, that affects its supply, right? There's fewer of them, and by definition, it's scarce, it's rare, there's low quantity, right? So that's going to affect the supply curve, right? Powerful, that is going to affect its demand, right? When LSS makes the cards, yeah, they definitely choose to make good cards rare sometimes to push sales because they know that people will buy the box to get the good cards. But you can make a good card that's very powerful, like Sink Below, that's common, and you can make bad cards that are rare, like Shadow Plasmafett. Not that Shadow Plasmafett's a bad card, it's just not that good, right? It's not going to win you a game on its own or something. Whereas Shelter from the Storm is so unbelievably powerful that it's crazy to see it printed in a set at all. So it's powerful, great, but there are a lot of powerful cards. Like Channeling Frigid's really powerful, but it's only about $20 when it's really cooking on its price. Whereas you'll have some cards like Codex of Frailty being a card that is $80 or $100 or something, or Command and Conquer is like $80 or $100. Why is that? Well, it depends on how many people want it, right? Demand is basically saying how many people want to buy it at this price, and the more people that want to buy it at a higher price, the higher its demand. So if you only have 10% of the player base who plays the hero that wants to run this powerful card, it's just not going to be able to command that high of a price because there's not that many people that want it. So even if there might be, let's say, only 500 copies that exist in the entire world, which is very scarce, but there's only 3 players who play that hero, well, there's probably going to be about 400 copies that people don't need or want that will drive down the price of that thing. And so what we're saying is, when a card is generic, it also is going to affect its demand because everybody can run it. Every single player in Flesh and Blood can run Shelter from the Storm, Find-All Spring Tunic, Warmonger's Diplomacy, Command and Conquer, and so on and so on and so on. So what we're saying is, again, this is no great revelation, but the point is that when you look at new Flesh and Blood cards, the more heroes that can play it, the higher its price is going to be, especially when it is powerful and especially when it is rare. So how do we identify when cards are worth buying to save ourselves money and potentially catch the market at a good time to be able to sell back later or trade up for things that we want in the future? The way that you're going to want to do that is you're going to want to identify cards that are rare, such as Majestics, Legendaries, maybe even Fableds, right? Or even Marvels. You're going to want to get those when they are low price. Obviously, it's hey, buy low, sell high. Anybody can do that. It's like, well, you have to be willing to buy cards when they're not competitively viable. Because when a card is not very strong, but it is rare, a lot of times the price in Flesh and Blood will reflect that in the sense that its price might start really high back when it's released, and then it'll normally plummet because people realize, hey, this card's not very good. I'm not going to spend my money on this card. I'm going to buy the good cards. And then no matter how rare this is, I'm not going to buy it. And then eventually some news comes out, it spikes, it goes up really high, and then maybe it never comes back down all the way again, but sometimes it'll still trickle down depending on the meta and things like that. So we can use a classic example of even Weakest Link, right? Because that's a card that I bought at a really good time. The Weakest Link started out kind of like at a normal range for Majestic. Like no one really knew what they were going to value it at. It might have started around $30 US, but pretty quickly in the first week or so after the game, like the set came out, part of the Mistveil, it started to plummet because more supply hit the market. People weren't really looking at the card. They were more focused on getting the legendaries, getting the class Majestics, things like Levels of Enlightenment and things like Mirror Guys and whatever. So we didn't really see a lot of people picking up the Weakest Link at the time. But once people started realizing, hey, this card's got good stats and whatever, eventually it started to pick up again until now it's up at, like the $60 range. It was even at like $80 at some point back when Lightning was really in the meta. So you have to remember that just because a card is low price doesn't mean it's low value. I think a lot of people assume that the price reflects the true value of a card, and they don't see the potential value of the card, and they don't decide to pick it up when it's low. Like me personally, I picked up my Weakest Link, not cold foils, rainbow foils at $10 a piece, if you can believe it. There's like $11 after tax or whatever. But so I bought a playset at $30, and I'm never selling them, right? Because I got the best deal that I'll probably ever get on them, and I'm very happy that I have them because of that reason. And the reason I was able to identify that is because I saw a card that was rare. It was a Majestic. It was at a low price for what a Majestic should be. Because again, let's review, why should a Majestic cost more than $5 or more than $10? Well, if you're paying $100 for a chance at 5 Majestics, because that's basically what you're paying for, then each of those Majestics should be at least $20. Otherwise, you wasted your $100 on that box. Now, sometimes you will get something that is more than $100. Sometimes you'll get a Fabled, sometimes you'll get a really sweet Legendary. And in those cases, yes, like that will overall affect the expected value of when you open a box, so that the Majestics don't have to be $20 for you to break even over time. But unless you're buying, again, in tons of bulk or in tons of quantity, at the end of the day, you want to be trying to get at least $20 out of each of the Majestics that you open, or maybe just call it 15, because you're going to probably get some rainbow foil Majestics in there. And so you probably want to peg the default value of Majestic at about $15. So if you see Majestic selling for under that, you're probably getting a good deal. Now, some Majestics are going to be really low demand, and they're going to go down to $1. And so you might think to yourself, oh man, I could have bought 15 of those for $1 later. You could do that, but at the same time, you don't want to try and over guess the market. You don't want to try to like overtime the market, because you could wait too long and then the card goes up and then you miss your chance to get it at a good price rather than while you were trying to get the best price. And so if you can get a Majestic, especially if they're like, $1, right? $1 Majestic to me is kind of insulting, because to me it says, why are you selling that card? Do you really need the $1 that much that you're willing to sell this card, which eventually is in such scarcity that it could be really, really powerful one day and really demanded when the right situation happens, that it just goes like at least to $10. I mean, it doesn't have to go to $100 or something. And of course, people want to liquidate the cards that they have. They want to clear up space so they can hold different inventory or different things in their homes, whatever the case is. But generally, if I see a Majestic for like $1 or less, I'm generally thinking of buying it if I don't have a copy. Because what? Worst case is you're out $1, whatever, right? You're out $3 because you got a play set, or $1.50 because they reach 50 cents. And especially when they're like a foil, that's a good thing to do too, because I remember I bought my Poison the Well foils at like 30 cents a piece. And then the card, once Verdance and Florian came out, spiked up, and Count Your Blessings, right? Spiked up to like, $30, whatever it was, as a non-foil, because all of a sudden this card was relevant when it had no relevancy in the game before. So I just say I bring that up to say it's really powerful to just filter on TCG Player, buy Majestic, buy price low to high, and just see, hey, does this card look like it can ever go anywhere? Does it ever look like it's going to be powerful in any context? And then is it cheap enough that's like, hey, if I buy this, it literally won't affect me at all, that if it never is relevant? Or can you buy it and be like, hey, I'm going to hold on to this for a little while, and if it goes up, I'll have it and I'll be ready. That's kind of the idea there. That is becoming less possible, I'll mention, with, I believe it was Part the Mistveil, they released a card called Prismatic Leyline. And I was waiting for that card to go down to like $1 for the longest time for the Rainbow Foil, but it just never went down. It just stayed high, and it was like $5 or $6 or $7 for Rainbow Foil. And I thought, man, like I really want it to go lower, but I want the card and I want to have my play set. So I just bit the bullet and I bought them. And I think they've gone up since then, but that's not really the point. The point is that when you've got a card that's got potential and it is rare, because Majestics are rare. Again, we're getting 5 Majestics per box. You might, right? You might get 1 Rainbow Foil Majestic per box. Think about that. You're spending $100 to get some Majestics, a Rainbow Foil Majestic, and that's all you're really getting, besides the commons, which are going to be worth basically nothing anyway. On top of that, never forget the fact that even though you're getting that 1 Rainbow Foil Majestic, there are like 30 plus Majestics in a set, maybe 35 to 40 plus Majestics in a set. So the odds that you're going to get the Majestic that you want in Rainbow Foil from your $100 box is astronomically low. You know, you've got like basically a 3% chance that one of the Majestics that you like, each time that you pull a Majestic, that you're going to get the one that you want. So the odds that you're going to get the Majestic that you want out of the 5, extremely low. And add that to the fact that maybe you're going to have 1 chance out of a box, 1 chance per $100 to get a foil version of the Majestic. You can start to see just how few Majestics there are out there that are actually Rainbow Foil. So like, let's say there were 200,000 boxes printed for the Hunted, right? That means there's probably about 200,000 Rainbow Foil Majestics, give or take, right? Well, then if we divide that by, let's say there's about 35 Majestics in the set. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but we can do some basic long division here, and maybe hopefully I won't like embarrass myself on camera here. But we got 35 goes into 200 about like what, 6 times or 5 times, right? 150 and 175, and then we've got 25 left over, 250. That's going to be about what is that, 7 times, because that's 210 plus the 35, so that's 245, right? Yeah, so I think that's going to be going 7 times, and then 245, etc. And then we're going to go just down throughout the rest of it here. So the point is like, you're going to have a really small quantity of Rainbow Foil Majestics in this entire set. And it might be like 5,700 or some number around like that. Like we can round up to 5,800 or something along those lines. Obviously, that's not exactly the case, but oh, right. Yeah, because this is like how many of your Majestic there are going to be in the set. So again, we'll just simplify it to say Rainbow Foil Majestics selling for like under $1 is insane. If I was a store, I would just not sell them, right? Me personally, I think it's silly that people actually sell them for such a low price, because you're basically gaining nothing. And if the card ever does go up, it's going to shoot up astronomically fast because there's such low quantity. People will scoop them up so fast, and you'll just miss out on all that potential gain for what? Especially for foils. Like, unless you're really just swimming in foil Majestics, you're really not going to take up a lot of space with those. So while I do love all these stores that have generously donated me so many wonderful cards at great prices, if you are opening your foil copies of, you know, your Command and Conquers, like the extended arts, if you're opening your Shelter from the Storms, if you're opening your, you know, your foil copies of the expansion slot cards, things like this, I would encourage you to hold on to them and recognize that they will have value. They are scarce. They are things that you have to pay money for to obtain. And so do not try to part with them for anything lower than at least $10. I'd say like 10 US dollars. I think that you would be remiss to get rid of things that are niche for about that much. And then generics go up even higher, right? Because if we think about the price of a box of Mistveil was about $100, and the price of a Weakest Link was about $60 at one point, and it might be hovering there again, but it hit up to like $80 plus. So let's just say that it's $80. So you almost get the whole price of a box for a single generic card because it's that good. Why is that? And I'm rambling now, but let me just talk about one last thing and we'll kind of conclude. So when you think about what does the existence of these chase cards do to the economics of a trading card game ecosystem, you start to think about the fact that, okay, well, if I'm going to buy a box of, let's say, Arcane Rising, and it's $125 per box, and all I want out of this box is Command and Conquer, because Command and Conquer is worth like $90 to $100. So I'm getting most of the value of my box out of one card, and I know that if I hit that, I'm super great. And if I hit a legendary, I'm like super cooking, I'm like doing great, everything's wonderful. Well, if everyone's buying Arcane Rising just for the Command and Conquers, and because Command and Conquer is rare, one of the rarest things you can get out of Arcane Rising, what's that going to do to all the other cards that people have plenty of? People have plenty of Art of Wars because it's banned now. People have plenty of Storm Striders because enough people can play Wizard, or people have enough Skullbone Crosswrap or Red in the Ledgers or whatever other cards like Blazing Ethers that were in there. Those cards relative to Command and Conquer's supply are going to be overrepresented. And what does that look like, right? So what that looks like is you've got a card like Command and Conquer that has a certain amount of supply, and let's say it's really low, right? And so what we're saying is that in order to get more supply, people have to pay him, open up more boxes, more boxes, more boxes to move up this curve, right? And so you might have, when the boxes first open, a very low, sorry, that's not demand curve. This is demand curve, this is supply curve. You might have very few people opening packs, and so there might be very low supply of Command and Conquer, but people are willing to pay this much. So what's going to happen is people are going to charge that much for that supply, and a lot of people are not going to be able to buy Command and Conquer because there's only so much supply, and that's going to go to the people who pay the most, right? As more and more Command and Conquers are opened, more and more people who are able to buy it at lower prices are able to afford it because the people who have already bought their Command and Conquers are satisfied. They don't want any more. And you hit that equilibrium price. And then if people open just, like let's say there was a printing glitch and there was 1 million Command and Conquers and we had more than we needed, there were so many, everybody could afford to buy one at a low price because people just be swimming in them and wouldn't have to worry about it, right? But what ends up happening when you have a rare card that's driving the sale of the booster product itself is saying that, hey, Command and Conquer might drive prices up to a certain point where the quantity of the them is produced so that this price can be here, right, at P star. But what happens, right? What happens when the boxes become more scarce? Right, when the boxes become more scarce, the price of them goes up. Therefore, the cost goes up to get the Command and Conquers. Therefore, they have to open up less. They can open up fewer boxes with the same amount of money, and so they have to charge more in order to keep their same profit margin. So the supply curve of Command and Conquer in the marketplace would shift to the left if the price of the boxes went up. That would increase the price of the Command and Conquers, which would help keep pace with opening more supply out of the boxes. But that has a feedback loop where over time, as we've seen with a lot of older booster box products, the booster boxes go up in price over time because they become more scarce. The cards in them that are desirable become more expensive over time because they are harder to produce from those boxes because they cost more. And so what does that do when you've got all this supply being driven to get only the Command and Conquers? They start paying for the entire box, or the Weakest Links start paying for the entire box. All the other cards in the set are basically down here with their supply. They get pushed further and further and further to the right because they have already been satisfied in quantity. There's more quantity than there ever needed to be. And so the more that the value shifts into the Command and Conquers, the Weakest Links, the Shelter from the Storms, the less and less each other card is going to be worth in the set. So that unless you're going after those chase, staple, rare, majestic cards, your deck is actually getting cheaper. So basically, this is kind of a motivational type of moment where you can look at this type of economic situation and think, man, I want to play with Command and Conquer. I want to play with Heart of Fyendal. I want to play with Spring Tunic. I want to play with all these expensive cards. Yeah, that's great. And that's a really important thing to be able to do if you want to play the game and enjoy it in its full glory of just all the cards and everything like that. But just know that if you don't end up feeling like you have the ability or the desire to buy all these expensive cards, the game gets made better for you because your card price is being subsidized by all the people that are paying for the expensive cards. Them buying these Command and Conquers and incentivizing people to open more boxes and drive the box prices up and then keep selling the cards for more prices floods the supply with other cards that you can buy on the low, very cheap, and build the majority of your deck for basically, just dollars, sometimes pennies, depending on, what type of deck you're playing. And in the end, that benefits pretty much everybody. The only person that it doesn't really benefit are the people who really want to play the cards but can't afford them. But the thing is a lot of people, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much you care about the thing. And if you exist here on the demand curve and you don't value Command and Conquer at $100, you're just not going to buy it. And you're going to be happy with that decision, because if you weren't happy, then you would make a way to buy it, I guess. And obviously that's kind of just a very academic and economic way of looking at things, not like a really human or really personal way to look at it. But that's just kind of the overall story. If you stuck with me this far, I hope you were able to enjoy some aspect of what we talked about today. Basically, the whole point of this is, if we could just summarize, just so we have something to take away and walk away from this with. If you want to spend as little as possible on your Flesh and Blood collection and make it valuable without spending a lot, you want to focus on rare cards that cost very little, right? It might be bad. It might be bad when you buy it, right? It might be bad competitively. It might be really niche. It might not have a very good effect. But if it has the potential to be good, if it has the potential to do something in the future, like obviously Wounding Blow Blue, if it were a Majestic, would not be a card that we would be crazy over, because it's a vanilla card that just doesn't have good stats. We're not going to say that a card like that is going to be really powerful. But a card that has a really impactful effect, like say Poison the Well, could very well one day, the moment we print Healing Synergy, become a de facto good blue instant to counteract things like Counter Blessings or what have you. And so when we think about what cards should be worth, when you're paying $100 a box and you're getting 5 Majestics, you really want those Majestics to be like at least $15. And if they're not $15, or at least like 10 or something, you really just shouldn't sell it, in my opinion, unless you really need that money. You're really trying to get throw stuff in for a trade for something for a tournament that you just really want. Just remember that your cards have value. Your cards are not necessarily going to be valuable that metagame, but the scarcity and the cost it does take to acquire those cards can show up out of nowhere the moment that the demand gets corrected. Because what ends up happening is the demand might be in the absolute gutter, right? And so the price is, is sub $1, less than $1. And the supply that's on the market is maybe like a certain amount because people just don't care to list it because it's not worth anything. But then eventually LSS prints some new hero that it's the perfect card for, and then everybody all of a sudden can make use of this because now it's like this perfect tech card, counter card. The demand is going to shoot way up, right? It's going to shift to the right. Price is going to go way up to like greater than $1. And then you'll be happy that you held on to it. And all of a sudden, people are going to flood the market with more and more supply as they realize that it's worth money, until, people can't sell it for more than what they paid for it, or until they decide, hey, it's better for me to keep this and use it. So different style of video. My training in school is in economics and financial economics. So to me, Flesh and Blood is really fascinating. It's just a case study to look at markets and things. So I'm happy to talk about this more and maybe do a more focused primer on economics in general. But if there's no interest, obviously we won't make more of the video, but I thought it'd be cool. And I hope that it helps you in the Hunted not part with your really great extended arts and rainbow foils and Majestics too quickly just because it's a hero that you don't play. Definitely if it's something that you're going to just throw in a binder or something, that can pay dividends later when the card all of a sudden becomes really valuable in the future. Or, do whatever you want to do, obviously, but that would be my recommendation. I've been saved many times by having my binders full of cards that I just didn't think anything of, and all of a sudden it's perfect trade fodder. All of a sudden it's the perfect thing to just turn it into something that I do want. And also I'll throw one last thing in here, that it's good to not try to go for the perfect dollar amount with trades, especially with your locals. If you've got people that live near you and their friends and their community members, give them a good deal. It's something that encourages them to give you good deals in the future, to be generous with you, to help you. And like, for instance, one of my locals opened up a cold foil Lightning Greaves, and I was really interested in Lightning Greaves because I think it's a good card. It's generic as far as like being a talent. So if a Lightning Illusionist ever gets printed, or a Lightning Ranger gets printed again, or a Lightning Wizard besides Acilio, Acilio could be cool, but if any of those, my favorite classes, or Lightning Warrior, right, get printed, then I want to be able to have access to Lightning Greaves because it's a really good card. And I had a cold foil Riptide in my binder that I was never going to use. I am not a Riptide player. I don't like Riptide, but I won it at a Road to Nationals. And so I knew that the guy who pulled the card plays Riptide a lot, really enjoys Riptide. He was trying to get rid of the Lightning Greaves. And so I said, hey, I'll trade you this Riptide for Lightning Greaves. And it was pretty easy, no fuss, no muss. I also traded like a cold foil Bolton for a Traverse the Universe Rainbow Foil because at the time, it was like $80, $90 or something, and the Bolton cold foil wasn't terribly much more. And I thought, the guy who I'm trading this with loves Bolton, plays Bolton all the time. I would rather him use this card, this beautiful cold foil, than me have it just in a binder somewhere, and I still get a card that I really wanted out of it that I don't have to spend money on. So, taking wins sometimes can help you take losses in other places to give other people wins, and I think that's a good thing. So definitely don't be too greedy with your flesh and blood trades and stuff. Don't try to be a car salesman. We don't need to be that cutthroat. At the end of the day, it's still just a game. So I hope you enjoyed this talk about economics and finances and markets. Again, if you're more interested in this going forward, we can talk about it more. Yeah. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you at the Calling Memphis. Watch out, and I'll be eager to play against you and see you there. So if you see me, say hi. Otherwise, take it easy and have a good week.